Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel and today I am going to be doing a book review or a discussion, whatever, of a book that I just recently finished, and that book is Lavender House by Lev A.C. Rosen. Luckily, I still happen to have my library copy of this book. I haven't returned it yet. I just finished it a couple of days ago. So I figured I might as well do this review now while I've still got the book in hand and can actually show it to you a bit instead of having to just like put a picture of the cover up on the screen, because it saves me some trouble in the editing. So yeah, this book I enjoyed quite a bit. This is a murder mystery, historical murder mystery, a queer historical murder mystery. So this is set in 1952 in San Francisco and vicinity. And yeah, this is a murder mystery. I heard this described to me as basically Knives Out, but like queer and historical. I will say that's a yes and a no. It's a yes in the sense that the basic premise of this book is basically the same as Knives Out. If you're not familiar with Knives Out, it's a film directed by Rian Johnson a few years ago, starring Daniel Craig and a bunch of other people. And the basic premise of that movie and this book is essentially that the wealthy head of a family is murdered, and a detective is brought in to investigate this murder, and the entire suspect pool is basically the rest of the family and some of the hired help, right? And that's basically the premise of both that movie and this book. That's really as far as the comparison goes, though. I think if you expect Lavender House to be tonally like Knives Out, that's not what's going on here. Knives Out is a comedy. It lovingly pokes fun at the murder mystery genre, and it's full of dark humor and lots of funny stuff, lots of jokes. Lavender House is not, I would not describe Lavender House as a comedy. It is not funny. It, for lack of a better term, it plays the tropes straight, for lack of a better term. So yeah, that's the basic premise is where the comparison really ends between those two stories. So yeah, I will say right at the outset, because this is an historical novel and it focuses on queer people, you know, you should definitely double check the trigger warnings if you have any around especially homophobia, homophobic violence, homophobic slurs, internalized homophobia and external homophobia, and as well as there's a bit of suicidal ideation in this as well, as in addition to all of the usual kinds of content warnings that come with this being a murder mystery, because obviously there's some death in here, and some relatively potentially some gruesome, some vaguely gruesome things discussed occasionally do around the murders. So yeah, you should probably check content warnings before you read this book, because again, we're talking a lot of very, sort of period accurate treatment of queer people and queer relationships going on in this book. It's a pretty big, important aspect of this book. And so, obviously I always advocate that everybody, keep yourself safe, keep yourself okay, make sure you're okay with reading things like that before you pick up this book. That said, I did quite enjoy this book. I really liked the characters, were all extremely well drawn. Our main character, Andy, is a well, now former SFPD detective who has lost everything, basically, his job, his livelihood, even his home, his apartment, after he is caught in a raid on a gay bar. He's caught in a raid on a gay bar. His colleagues, now former colleagues, obviously treat him horribly, as you would expect, and basically get him blacklisted from pretty much any honest work in town. And because this is written, I will say, this is written in first-person present tense, which I know I've complained about on this channel before. But in this case, it works for me, I think, because being forced to sit in Andy's head and from his perspective, his very immediate perspective, and his feelings about himself, both himself, who he is, and his own situation, does make it very, yeah, it makes it very immediate. It makes it very, it really forces you to think about what it is like to be, what it would have been like to be a queer person in the early 1950s in America. So yes, the premise of this is that Andy is basically trying to drink through whatever's left of his money after he's lost his everything else in his life, and he is hired by the widow of a woman who owned a big fancy soap company. And she says that her wife was murdered. And they live in this big mansion called Lavender House, and they've gathered this family of queer people together, including the murdered woman's son, who is gay, his boyfriend, his wife, right? They had sort of arranged a marriage for him with another queer woman, and his wife, Margot, also has a girlfriend who stays over. And it's this sort of group of people who all live together in this house, and they are able to sort of be themselves openly and without shame, at least within the walls of this big mansion, Lavender House, that they live in. But of course, one of them is very possibly a murderer. And Andy is tasked with finding out who that may be. And so it's a very prickly, thorny kind of situation. It's even sort of unclear, like, what is even going to happen if and when Andy finds out who the murderer is, because there's not really any way for them to bring the police into this situation, because everything about their situation is just begging to be, you know, unearthed by the police, by the you know, the press. If any of it becomes public, it could destroy everything. It could destroy their lives. So they have to be very careful about what they do. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's a good murder mystery. It's solidly plotted. It's solidly thought out. It progresses in a very nice, quick clip. It's not very long. It's less than 300 pages long. So it progresses very nicely. I think it's structured pretty well as a murder mystery. So in terms of like where it sits or how it sits within the murder mystery genre, I think it works pretty good. Andy, as a main character, as our POV character, is a very interesting person to sit in his... It's very interesting to sit in his mind and to sit in his feelings. He's a gay man. He's a self-loathing gay man. He has a lot of internalized homophobia, a lot of shame around that. That affects how he thinks and how he sees the world. He's also a former cop, which of course is quite problematic. Many of the queer people that he meets are very suspicious of him as a former cop, because he was a cop. You know, the cops at this time, that's basically what they did for fun, right? It was they harassed queer people. They raided gay bars to try and catch them doing indecent acts or whatever, so that they could jail them and beat them up. So the fact that he used to be a cop is very suspicious to many of the other queer people he meets, and he feels very conflicted and guilty about that. And the fact that he, you know, didn't really do much of anything while he was a cop to actually help the queer community. You know, he thinks a lot about all the ways in which he tried very, very hard to protect himself, but did not try very hard to protect anybody else while he was on the force, which is, you know, I appreciate that that this book tackled that in such an interesting and nuanced way, because yeah, it is very problematic when queer people are the cops and they're hiding, right? Because he was hiding among the police. And, you know, even though he didn't actively participate in any raids against gay bars, he certainly didn't do anything to stop them either. And so that's a really interesting thing. All of the family members and the hired help in this house are really three-dimensional. They all feel like real people. They're not caricatures of anything, really. They're not caricatures of a 1950s, you know, they're not caricatures of a 1950s housewife or businessman or anything like that, nor are they caricatures of, you know, what a gay person might have been like in the 1950s. They're all very different people, very distinct, well-drawn characters, and you do start to come to care about them, right? And as the book goes on, Andy himself also thinks, you know, like, he wants to find out who did this, but also he's a little sad at the prospect of one of these people being a murderer, because he doesn't want any of them to have been the murderer in many ways. And that kind of holds true for me as a reader as well, which is an interesting way to do it, I think, because a lot of times, like, especially, again, to bring the comparison back to Knives Out, which this book has been compared to Knives Out. One of the biggest differences, I think, is that in this book, most of the characters end up being pretty likable. At first, they're not necessarily all likable. At first, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like these people. But as you get deeper into the book, most of them become a lot more sympathetic. In Knives Out, it's sort of the opposite, where you meet all the family members and they seem okay at first, but as the movie goes on, they all become, like, worse and worse people. Right? Like, even the quote-unquote liberal members of the family in Knives Out are actually, like, horrible, racist, rich people, and by the end of the movie, you're really only rooting for one character, right? But in this book, it's kind of the opposite effect. As you get to know these characters more and more, you become, at least I did, I became much more sympathetic to all of them. And yeah, this book does a lot to deal with, again, what it was actually like to be a queer person in the early 1950s, when it's, you know, maybe not technically illegal to be gay anymore, but it's certainly not accepted either. And if you are discovered, if you're outed to the general public, you can lose everything. You can lose your home. If your landlord finds out you're gay, he can evict you for no reason other than you're gay, because we didn't have non-discrimination laws back then. And so you have to walk, every queer person has to walk a very fine line. And again, it engenders a lot of internalized homophobia. It engenders a lot of, you know, Andy spends a lot of time trying to say, you know, trying to feel like he's not one of those queers, you know, he's not one of those gay people who can't even hide who he is. And he's, you know, he's trying to be sort of mainstream or accepted in the mainstream. And he discovers that even being an assimilationist won't save you when they find out that you are actually gay. It doesn't matter. They don't care. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that in here. There's a lot of stuff about how the Lavender house itself it's both a place where this family and these people and even the hired help are queer, can be themselves and be who they are fully and honestly, but at the same time it's kind of a gilded cage, because every time they step outside of its walls, they have to hide again, right? And so it's maybe not a perfect solution, right? It's not necessarily a perfect solution to the broader societal problem of homophobia. So yeah, that's a really good aspect of this book. So yeah, I really enjoyed Lavender House. I think it is worth a read if you're at all into murder mysteries, because it is a very fun and interesting murder mystery, but it is also very much a historical queer novel that is about being queer in that particular time and place and what it meant and how it felt. And that is very visceral, and that is very immediate, and it's a little bit harrowing at times, and definitely a little bit depressing, though I will say this does have at least a hopeful sort of ending, is what I would say. It's a hopeful ending to this book. But it is often very depressing as well, so keep that in mind if you want to read this. But yeah, this was a good read for me and a good time. So yeah, this was Lavender House by Lev A.C. Rosen. And that's what I got for you today. That's all I've got for you today. So yeah, next video will probably be another tag video. I'm probably going to record it right after this, so don't mind if you see me. You're going to be seeing me wearing the same clothes in the next video as well. Because this week I'm just recording a couple videos in a row. So yeah, that's what I got. Have you read this book? Are you interested in reading it? Do you have any other good, fun, queer murder mystery reads for me? Let me know in the comments below. You can like this video if you want, subscribe if you want to see more videos of me talking about books, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.